And when it comes to conservation organizations and initiatives that are working with specific species or trying to protect a specific ecosystem, I think that finding really fun and really emotional ways to connect with people is the ticket. You have to find a way to explain to people what the problem is, why you're trying to fix it, what's at stake. And you have to have the courage to share with them what it is that inspires you and draws you to that project. And if you can do that, people have an incredible barometer for authenticity and truth.
Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet and holding people in power to account. This podcast is recorded and edited on Gadigal land. Our guest today is conservationist Paul Rosolie. You may be familiar with his work, particularly his books, his growing social media presence, and most notably for protecting 55,000 acres of rainforest in the Peruvian Amazon through his organization Junglekeepers and Tamandua Expeditions. Now, speaking personally, I read Paul's memoir, Mother of God, in 2014, shortly after Mongabay published a review of it, and it's fair to say it's what led me to becoming an environmental journalist. Paul and I reflect on this serendipitous inspiration, but it is just the tip of the iceberg to a well of storytelling that he has built over the years. In our conversation, we dip into that well, and we talk about some of the most surprising and interesting ways that he has garnered support for conservation, how he works with local and indigenous communities to recruit illegal loggers into being conservation rangers, and what the ingredients are for effective communication strategies that resonate with a wider audience. It's a really great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. So, Paul, it is really great to finally meet you and speak with you, because I read your book, Mother of God, 10 years ago now. And it was a thing that eventually led me to, doing what I'm doing today. And so it's kind of circuitous that I'm, here interviewing on a podcast for Mongabay. For those of you listeners who aren't familiar with Paul's book, Mother of God, I highly recommend you read this memoir. And Paul can tell you a little bit more about it. But Jeremy Hance, who was a staff member at the time, wrote a really great review of the book, and I will link that in the show notes. But this book was just incredible, and it is what got me interested in environmental journalism in the first place.
First of all, good to meet you too, man. That's a crazy story. That's a huge, I thank you for telling me that. It's really good to know. How long ago was that? You read that you said about a decade ago?
Yeah, it was like 2014, almost 10 years ago. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was auditioning and I was an actor. And it's what got me interested in environmental news and the environment. And after reading that book, I sort of decided to get involved in environmental journalism.
That's so wild, because it's not only full circle for you, it's full circle for me too, because Mongabay, I was 22. I had just started when and I kind of just sent them some stuff, and I was I've been seeing some crazy stuff in the Amazon. That was 17 years ago. And they were Rhett and Jeremy were very kind to me. And over the years, we've just collaborated, hit back and forth. And it's really cool to be doing a podcast now.
Yeah, and again, this book it's sort of a background into how Paul came to do what he's doing right now. But it is a really good insight into a specific region of the Amazon, the Madre de Dios. And if you have even just a passing interest in the environment, it's a book you should definitely read. But for our audience, it's definitely a book that I highly recommend you read. So I will link that in the show notes as well. But it's great, Paul, to see your work get so much recognition and so many people interviewing you. And it seems like every other week I see another podcaster interviewing you, and I'm just happy to see so many people taking an interest in your work.
It is pretty crazy, because if you go back to Mother of God, now me and JJ call that like the barefoot machete days. Cause like back then it was just the two of us standing by the side of a river being, watching them cut down these trees, being like, man, I wish we could do something, just ripped apart by it. And our wildest dreams never included what we're doing now. Like we thought maybe, I don't know, at the beginning, it was very much like we wanted to let someone know so they could do something. It was very much like we were like, okay, we have to notify someone so they can come out here and do something. And then it dawned on us that it's the middle of the Amazon. We're past where law enforcement goes. There's no one coming out. There's no help coming. And so then there was the realization, okay, if no help is coming, then the only ones who can do anything about this are us. And then we had to go through this whole thing of, shed the skin of imposter syndrome, because, you look at these illustrious PhDs and all these professional conservationists and these huge NGOs, and you go, well, we're just standing on the side of a river with a machete. We can't possibly do anything to stand up against the Goliath of the Trans-Amazon Highway and the World Bank and Brazil and China and global development that is causing this little tentacle of a road to reach this tiny little artery of a river that's destroying this beautiful forest that we love. So you're taking on this dragon. You're seeing a tentacle of this much, much larger monster when you try to stop deforestation. So we really had to go through a very long period of trial and error and finding out what doesn't work, and then gradually realizing that we were able to protect some forests. And that's been, it's interesting that you just said Mother of God really is sort of as a book is the first chapter. And then it was after that we started right at the last pages of Mother of God, right as I was finishing the book, we were like, we're going to call ourselves the Junglekeepers, and we're going to protect this forest. And we had just sort of gotten this image in our head, and that was like 2010 or 11. And then it was very soon after that things started picking up, and gradually we built to where we are now, which is protecting more forests than we ever thought that we would, and sort of creating a whole new problem for ourselves. I am not a sports person at all, but I think it's a very good analogy that, if let's just say you're an American football player or a football player, whatever. You practice and train as hard as you can, and you beat all the guys in your hometown, and then you beat all the guys at university, and then you get into the majors, and then you're in the NFL, you're in the major leagues of whatever sport it is, and then you get on the field. Well, now you're on the field, and there's a few hundred guys in the league ahead of you, and you're on the losingest team in the league, and you still got to get to that front. And it's like, just getting on the field could take half a lifetime of work, and then actually being effective in the field that you fought to be on is a whole different ballgame, and staying there is a whole different ballgame. And so I think in conservation, we're fighting such massive odds that I'm still shocked that we're here.
And you are protecting 55,000 acres of rainforest, which is an impressive feat. But walk me back a little bit and tell me, which one came first, Tamanda or Junglekeepers, or did they sort of kind of get created in tandem?
No, so Tamandua was like thing number one. It was when I first went down there and I met JJ, who is an Essayha Indian, and he had been a conservationist his entire life, and he'd already been a wildlife guide. And so when I went down there as a research volunteer, he said, look, if you could help us out, great. We have this tiny research station. If you could bring more people, if you have access to gringos, that'd be great. And I went, well, I know gringos. Hell yeah. And so I would go home and print my photos onto, 4x6s and show them to my friends physically. And then as we started bringing people more and more, then it started to become like, okay, well, we need to just, for basic operations, we need to be a little bit more organized than this. And so my friend Lee was like, hey, we should turn this into like a company and formalize it. And at the time I was like, no, because I don't want to do anything in tourism. But I was not seeing at first that this was a way, forget tourism. This is a way for us to bring travelers authentically to the jungle to see what we're doing, and to sort of, give them a chance to interact with the local people and the local ecosystem, and really build allies that were going to help us along the way. Right. So Tamandua definitely came first, and was the way that, we first started bringing people to the rainforest.
And so, and now you also have Junglekeepers as well, and you employ rangers, which you have said in other interviews are former loggers. Like you're actually taking people that previously their sustenance was cutting down the rainforest, and now their livelihood is protecting it. And so I'm kind of curious to hear how you see alternative livelihoods taking shape in the Amazon, where you see the biggest potential, because it looks like there's a lot of potential in ecotourism, but then there's also a lot of potential in just straight up protection as well.
Yeah. The logging thing is crazy. And that really started with that. Some of our earliest rangers, we'd go into their background and say, well, what did you used to do? And they go, oh, well, I used to work as a maderero in the noventas and the 90s. And there was a huge period of extraction on our river, the mahogany boom in the 1990s. And so most of the guys in the region were working as loggers. And so a lot of our rangers were just like, yeah, man, this is just more work. And we started realizing like, what? Like, so you don't care. That's one thing that people, I think that online, let's say I post something about burning forest or I write an article about deforestation. Right away, you get a lot of these really indulgent comments where people are like, the greed of humanity and, damn these evil extractors. And they want to create this black and white narrative. And it's not at all like that. It's, there's a bunch of poor guys in the middle of the jungle that need a way to provide for their family. And they're going to do whatever they can do. And so they don't want to go move to a city and put on a suit and stare at a computer all day. So they're going to live out in the jungle, and they're either going to hunt, fish, log, mine. And again, if you want to live a subsistence life in the Amazon as a human being, the jungle can handle that at small scale. It's when you start ripping the ancient trees out, when you start ripping out 1,000-year-old trees, that you start removing the pillars of the ecosystem. And so what we started realizing was that we could just go talk to these guys and offer them a better job. Logging is dirty, dangerous. You're away from home for long periods of time. There's falling trees, there's heavy machinery, there's disease, there's rain, there's flooding rivers. It's a very difficult way to make a living. And so if we say, hey, why don't you stop logging? Come work for us. And you can use all the jungle knowledge that you already have to protect it. A lot of these people work out there because they love it too.
And so I'm kind of curious, what do people say to you when you offer them work? Like what's their reaction?
Usually it's like a slow process. So usually what'll happen is sometimes it's been various ways. Sometimes in the past we've held like job applications for Junglekeepers. But other times it's that like literally that we go and we negotiate with loggers. We'll go to a place where we see a lot of trees coming down. We will go there and buy them a drink. The first thing we do is let's go sit down. Let's go open a beer together. Let's hang out. What are you guys cutting? And they'll be like, oh, we're cutting tons of shiwaka. And we'll be like, really? Wow. How many, cubic feet are you cutting a month? Okay, cool. Where are you guys from? Okay, cool. Just sit there and, they go, what do you guys do here? And we'll go, okay. And then snakes are a great icebreaker. I'll always be like, yeah, man, look at these anaconda photos. And they'll be like, wow, where'd you see that? That's a huge anaconda. Most people, even in the Amazon, most people have, they sort of have an imaginary version of an anaconda in their head. Most of them haven't seen a really big one. So that's kind of my like way of breaking the ice. I'll be like, you guys caught one this big? And they'll be like, who is this gringo that's caught that wrestles snakes? And then we'll just start joking with them. And of course, JJ's the key. JJ's been the key to Junglekeepers. Having, an indigenous leadership in Junglekeepers is the real key, because whatever silly anecdotes I can tell to get them to laugh, he's the guy that can come in and be like, look, as a local, here's what my opinion is. Here's what I think. I went out with my brothers. They were all loggers. And you know what? What we're doing is incredible. You should come check it out. And they trust his word. And so that's really where the authenticity has come from, is that Junglekeepers at the heart of it is Indigenous-led. And so, yeah, you mentioned I've been doing like a lot of podcasts and stuff. And, recently somebody asked me like, how come you don't have your team up on the podcast with you? And I explained, first of all, they're in the Amazon rainforest, and most of the podcasts that I do happen when I'm here. But I could tell this person was like edging towards being like, oh, do you have like some sort of hero complex? And I was like, listen, everything I've done in the Amazon, I compare it to like a parent taking their child to go fishing. You buy the fishing rod, you find a worm, you take your kid in the car, you drive them to a stream, you find the deepest spot, tell them exactly where to drop their hook, and then they catch a fish. And it's like, did they catch a fish, or did you catch a fish with a fishing rod in their hands? And it's like, that's anything that we've been able to do has been because I've just been following their lead, listening to what they say. And Roy and JJ and Victor and Pico and all the locals that are down there have been incredible. And then they've been complemented by a great international team of conservationists that also runs things and has just been expanding on the ranger program, expanding on how much territory we protect, working on scientific publications. We've really just been trying to make as much noise in every possible sphere that this is a river that's worth saving before it's too late.
Right. And, the work you do is not without its risks or dangers. And to that point of, your team being on social media, you actually mentioned in another interview that you were leading a team of reporters to, I can't remember if it was a mining site or a logging site, but you were leading a team of reporters, and someone from the area, local from the area, said to you, these people all recognize you. They all know who you are. And so you're in their territory now. You should be careful, I'm paraphrasing. And so it seems like there would be some risk there to put your team on social media.
Yes, definitely easier for me, the politics of murdering a foreigner versus a Peruvian. I think that a lot of the local activists are at much greater risk for assassinations, and Manga Bay has reported on this a lot, that assassinations across the world for environmental leaders, especially in the Amazon, are way more common than people think. And that's something that we have to be very careful about with our rangers. We try. It's conflicting because on the one hand we want to support our rangers so much and celebrate them, and like there's so many times where I want to be like, oh, here's a post and so just did this, and we just got a new trail or a camera trap or a thing, and it's like we don't really want their faces out there.
Yeah,
it's not smart. And yeah, the gold miners knew who I was, and in the weird times that we live in, like I'll meet miners or loggers and they'll already follow me on Instagram. And these are people that are like out, you're like 3 days out in the Amazon rainforest, and they're like, oh, you're that guy. That's okay. Yeah. That's, and it's great when they're like, oh, I love snakes too. Like, here's the snake. And then you're like, oh, cool. Crap. We're good.
Right.
It has been spooky. Like I have been out in public, especially at night. And I've had, right after that, I did get threatened on the street. I had like a car pull up on the sidewalk and they were like, look, drop the gold mining thing. They're like, no more talking about that. And I got a very stern warning about that. And then they drove off, and they had their faces covered. And so that, this comes with the territory.
That's terrifying. Well, thankfully you're safe. So you're working with the CEO of Lightspeed, Dax Da Silva. And you've been working together with him since 2019. Can you just give our audience a primer about what are you working on with him?
So Dax came in it was like epic movie timing for Dax. He came in at a time when we absolutely needed him, when Junglekeepers was, we barely begun, and then COVID cut our knees out from under us. And during COVID, everyone that was logging and grabbing land just went out and said, okay, well, the authorities are stuck in town. Let's go out and just take everything. So they were out cutting, burning forest. And it was at that time that I connected with Dax. And he said, what do you guys need in order to run this operation well? What do you need to do it right to really make a difference at this? And so we started meeting with him and explaining how we'd have to run our ranger program, what guard posts we need, what everything else. So it really forced us to imagine, because up until then, doing it for real had been a dream. And then he said, okay, well, what do you need to make it happen? And then he really got involved with making that happen, funding that initiative, supporting it. And then he even came down to the Amazon with us and saw some of the deforestation sites, came to the areas that we protect, and then has been there with us as we've grown our ranger program. And as we've been growing that, he's been growing Age of Union, which is, I always tell people, it's easy analogy. It's kind of like the X-Men of conservation. He's really gone around to every really cool conservation project all over the world. He has guys in Indonesia. He's teamed up with Jane Goodall. He's working with Sea Shepherd, and he's putting his support wherever he can to just push these projects to be more successful, to give them a chance. I mean, there's some amazing work going on in the world right now, and he's in a position to really push those projects to a place where they're even more effective. And he's doing some incredible work.
Mm-hmm. And what has been the biggest what's been the biggest impact that he's had on the growth of your efforts?
How do I say this? The biggest impact he's had is that he's made it all possible. I mean, really, without him, this would not be a realistic dream. You know, he came in and said, we were so much smaller than we are now before we linked up with Age of Union, which is Dax's organization. He really set fire to this thing and turned it into something real. Before that, we were trying our best, and we had a couple of rangers, and we were protecting, maybe 2,000 acres or something like that. But since Dax came on, we really have gone professional with this and are doing conservation at a level that is on par with some of the best protected areas in the Amazon rainforest.
It does seem like your Junglekeepers and the success of your organization does seem to be thriving and really growing. And I'm just what do you attribute that to?
We attribute that to everyone we attribute that to so many people caring. It's been, right now our monthly donors system is ramping up. And since the podcasts and since the sort of the media attention that we've been doing this year, that's really been helping to get us on people's radars. And what that's allowed me to do is to explain to people that I don't know how other conservation organizations work, but what I do know is that we built Junglekeepers from the ground up with the local indigenous leaders. And it's an NGO, it's a nonprofit. So everything is completely transparent. When people give to Junglekeepers, it protects forest. That's it. So people come to me all the time and they say, what's the most direct way that I can protect the Amazon rainforest? I'm like, become a monthly donor to Junglekeepers. And a lot of people have done it. And so as that snowballed, we've been able to ramp up our efforts and put more urgent care into triaging the places that are being cut. I mean, this month, we're shutting down a logging operation, and it's not what people think. It's not, in this case, it's not violent. It's not action packed. We literally went up to them and said, hey, how many more trees are you going to cut? And they went, well, we've only cut, 30 trees, but back there's 2,500 acres of, it's just too dense back there. We don't want to go back there and cut. This is just crazy. The prices are dropping, but we still have to finish milling these trees. And we were like, listen, again, and by we, I mean, JJ went up there and was just like, listen, what if we just took it off your hands? What if we helped you? You're a local person. You're just trying to earn a living by cutting these trees. What if we just took it off your hands and protected it? And we did it. And so this person now is in the Junglekeepers family. And so that's the type of thing that's happening, is that all these people from all over the world who are giving us these monthly donations are making it possible for us to stop threats to the forest. And when you work, for anyone listening that's never been in a tropical rainforest, especially the Amazon, it's every single acre, every hectare, every little 100 meters by 100 meters, they're tiny little things. They are filled with millions of heartbeats, millions of species. It's so dense with life. So every single football field for the Americans, every single football field that you don't cut, you're protecting entire worlds and maybe species that have never been described to science. And so really, yeah, I attribute it to, Dax was integral in that happening. Joe Rogan helped a lot with us getting to Dax. And then also this year with us getting a whole bunch of new individual donors. It's been really, really interesting seeing people all over the world just sign on to this. A lot of people I feel like are looking for ways to help conservation. They're looking for ways to make these issues better. Nobody wants to hear that black rhinos are going extinct. They want to do something about it. And if there's a way that they know that they can do something about it and it's 100% going to have an impact, well, then they're in.
So on that note, you did mention that when you're in the rainforest, when you're in the Amazon rainforest, it's not like you can just call the authorities and be like, there's illegal logging happening, come and help me out, because for a variety of reasons, police, law enforcement won't necessarily come to your aid for for a number of reasons you stated in previous interviews. And so it's the challenge there is of approaching those situations like you're doing. I can only imagine is incredible. So I was wondering, can you describe to our listeners what that's like? What's the challenge of that like?
There's a reason that conservation is a thing. All right. So, people all over the world, as the generations go on, everybody wants to make money off of their land. And even with the loggers that we're seeing in the Amazon, someone's grandfather bought a parcel of land. And then these guys, generally the generation that we're seeing now, doesn't want to be out in the rainforest. And the easiest way to profit off the land that they have, because nobody wants to buy it because it's in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. It's inaccessible. And unfortunately, even though it's incredibly valuable as an ecosystem on a planetary level, on a ground level for a local person, there's no real way to profit off of the forest, especially if you aren't educated into agroforestry or something like that. And so selling your trees is a great way to make a buck. And so they want to sell their trees, just like somebody that inherits land in the United States often will parcel it up, make it smaller, sell it off to a development. And we see this there's just money flows in the direction of doing something human with the land. And so in the Amazon, it's sort of the same thing where everybody wants to make a cattle ranch. People want to log the trees. Cacao. I mean, I keep hearing about sustainable cacao, but every time I'm in the jungle and I see a cacao plant, it's at the expense of burning forests. So I'm not sure where the sustainable cacao is coming from. Now I'm going to get angry emails from the cacao lobbyists. I swear to God, every interview you do, some angry somebodies come out and let you know about their existence. But working out in the Amazon, the biggest problem is that you're working against a systemic problem that is the governments of South America, the governments of the world want ecosystems utilized. They're not happy. We don't recognize that they're creating that this forest is part of creating a fifth of our planet's oxygen and a fifth of our planet's fresh water that's coming out of the Amazon basin. That's not valuable. It's not a valuable concept on the ground. The reality on the ground is that unless you extract that ancient forest, it's useless. It's a wasteland. It's almost like I can't even find an analogy for it. They've said it's like burning down a cathedral to cook a meal, but these people are taking it a step farther. Some of them aren't even logging. Some of the people I've seen, we had an invasion not that long ago where they came in and they cut the forest, ancient trees on their sides, laying on the ground. All the green was gone. All the monkeys, all the birds, all the life was gone from this forest. And we saw these people out there and they were planting. We watched them. And a few weeks later, we see the sprouts start to come up. What are they planting? Oh, papayas. Papaya sells for like 3 centimos per kilo. Like it's almost free. It's the worst economic plan that I've ever seen in my life. They burnt down an entire jungle with tropical hardwoods. They could have made millions of dollars off of the wood. They just didn't know better. Mm. And so then a few months later, when narco traffickers come in there and they go, hey, so you guys are stuck here out in the jungle with papaya, we find out that what's happening is actually the drug lords are paying the local people to go out into the Amazon and make these little communities, because then it's easier to keep, trafficking their drugs out in the back country, out of the view of, there's no cops out there. It's no cops where we work. And so you have to wonder, where are these tiny little poor people getting $1,500 chainsaws from, and big, heavy outboard motors and boats and all these things? They're being funded. And so the loggers and the gold miners and the narcos are finding it advantageous to just have a network of people out there. And so the conquest of the Amazon is advantageous to the people that are illegally trying to profit off of it. And so we're up against a huge thing. And then, of course, the fact that down there, the law enforcement is already struggling to deal with what they deal with in the cities, let alone with the fact that they don't want to go out on expeditions out into the wilderness to go searching through the bush for, a few guys with chainsaws and maybe guns. They don't want to do that. And so it's very, very difficult to motivate these people to go out and actually enforce the law. Even if the law is that you can't cut a Brazil nut tree and you can't burn primary forests, well, good luck finding somebody who's going to come out there and do it. I mean, honestly, in the Madre de Dios, once you get 5 hours from town, once you're out in the back country, you literally don't have laws. It's like the Wild West. There's people get shot, people get kidnapped. It's whatever happens. It's like No Country for Old Men. It's not, there's no authorities governing the events that take place. It just is the wild.
That makes this next question I'm about to ask you seem maybe a little bit obvious, but I was going to ask you, what's the most difficult part about what you do?
Well, surprise. No, that's not, it's not an obvious one, because actually the most difficult part of what we do is that we have to have so many jobs. You know, most of the people I know go to work, they do their job, they come home. Mm-hmm. What we've done is, we've become compelled to protect this river. And so we've become tireless at that. And so I have to do my writing. I have to run the organization. I have to run Tamandua. I have to run my social media. I have to do, these are all basically full-time jobs. And then we have to also be out there in the field doing photography, doing the interviews with loggers and all this stuff. So you're doing 6 or 7 jobs. We're burning the candle at both ends. We just threw the candle to the fire. And so that's the hardest part. And that's the whole team. That's not just me. That's everybody. We have an incredible team that runs Junglekeepers behind the scenes. And like I said, the local guys on the ground, as well as everybody around the world who make up the directors of the organization. And that's a group of people that is tirelessly working to protect this ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm, having had jobs in the past where I'm doing multiple things, I totally understand the difficulty of doing that. Well, actually I don't, because I don't know what it's like to do what you do. But that is surprising. But your presence on social media is really prolific. If anyone has followed Paul's Instagram account, every day there's a new photo, there's a new reel of, some gorgeous landscape or, illegal logging. Like, you are very adept at creating images that tell the story that you're telling. And so is that the thing that you would say is like the strategy, the engagement strategy you have? Like, how do you engage with an audience? What is your strategy?
That's a great question. And that's something that I think is something that needs to be exported to other conservation organizations. And as I'm starting to do more consulting, that is something that I want to spread rapidly to people, because I know there's dedicated people doing incredible work all over the world. People who are far more effective than me, who are better scientists, who all kinds of things. What it boils down to for us is that what I've seen in terms of just reaching enough people that we get on their radar so that they can then decide whether or not they want to support the project. It's just doing that storytelling. And so it's when we do see some burning forests, is that we turn the camera on ourselves, tell people what we're seeing here. Because for the longest time, we would be down there, we'd see these horrible things. We'd see forests destroyed. We'd see poachers coming down river with a pile of animals in their boat. We'd see all this wild stuff that then, as a writer, you just write about it. But I've learned that if you can capture it with photos and video, if you can bring people into what it's like in the canopy of the Amazon in the morning, if you can bring people with you, which it took me years to understand this, but I'd be running through what used to be jungle and now is a field, and there'd be 70-foot flames and there's dead animals everywhere. And you're running through the ashes, trying to just find any animals that you can save and trying to get the images to show people what happens when we let forests burn. And then it was the one time that I, got so mad. I got so overwhelmed that I turned the phone on myself and started screaming and cursing and crying at my phone, basically saying, how can we let this happen day after day? How long do we expect this to happen before something changes? And then that changed a lot because people got to see it.
It's interesting you mentioned that video, because I distinctly remember that one. I was just scrolling Instagram one day, and I remember you were doing exactly as you just described. You were like screaming and crying, and asking the world, like, how can this happen? And so did you get like a massive reaction to that? Is that sort of like the thing that has stuck with people? Because it stuck with me, for sure.
That was a pivotal one for sure. Because that was in 2019 when the Amazon fires were worse than they had been for, I think, about 5 years before then. And now the thing is, the Amazon burns every year. 2019, what happened was the fires were worse. And the flames, because of the weather, the flames blew towards, I think it was Sao Paulo and Rio. And people took pictures that looked apocalyptic. Just these pictures, it really looked like this is the end. It's happening. The Amazon is burning. And then this whole thing went viral. And then I was reading all these articles and they were, the Amazon's burning worse this year. The Amazon. And I got so mad sitting there and I said, we see this every year. Why? The hypocrisy of it bothered me because I was like, why is everyone choosing now to do this? Why is everyone choosing now to be upset about it for 5 minutes? And so I threw that video up and it did change a lot. It did. That's because of that video, we got in touch with Dak. Because of that video, we got on Joe Rogan's radar. And that is part of what helped us get in touch with Dak. And it's like all these eyeballs all over the world, all these people who were able to share that video, who connected with that video. And that's what I hope we can sort of extend to other conservation organizations. Because whether you're protecting lemurs in Madagascar or black rhinos in Africa, or it's in Sumatra, it's whatever it is, there's people who I think that if we had the proper storytelling, really, really gripping or really, really fun, there's different things. I mean, for me, I always want the gritty and, the sort of like punch you in the face. This is the real deal thing. But along with that, I'm just as happy, whether we're going into the gold mining areas past the machine gun limit, or we're going to a rehabilitation center, we're going to see baby sloths today. It's like whichever one, whatever it is, as long as we're telling the story of exactly what's happening on the front lines. And so I've been trying to do that as much as I can with the Amazon, with the work that I do, which is in the Amazon rainforest and then over in Africa with Betpaw. And so whether it's protecting vast forests or, targeting species like black rhinos and elephants, I think that if people are brought up into the front lines, I think that that's a huge opportunity in the modern world. That right as we're at the most crucial time in history for extinction and ecosystems, we also have this incredible new tool to create, to connect with each other and to create. And I think that so many people who aren't in the conservation world assume that the headlines that heard, we've lost 70% of wildlife, we're losing this, we're losing that. It's always the bad headlines that count in the press. And to me, the last 17 years working in conservation, I've met incredible people all over the world that are working to save species. And I think if we can weather the storm of this sort of societal adolescence that we're in globally, I think that a lot of the problems that we're facing can be okay. I always tell people that, humpback whales they were up around, I think, 130,000. And then they went down to, I think, about 6 or 7 or 8,000 during whaling times. And then when they banned whaling, all of a sudden those populations were able to bounce back. And now we're up to over 100,000 humpback whales again. Same thing goes for bald eagles in this country. When I was growing up in the eastern US, we didn't see bald eagles. It's because DDT had destroyed their eggs, and bald eagles were on the endangered species list and still recovering. But because we took care of that, removed that threat, now I literally saw a bald eagle yesterday. There's wildlife bouncing back all over the world because people care, because people understand that we rely on these species too. And so it's taking heart from the success stories that's just as important as being aware of the urgency. We have to also sort of remind ourselves that it's not too late, that we're not, I feel like people jump to, the world is dying. And it's like, well, that is a huge assumption to make. It's a huge emotional leap to go from, we need to act quickly and effectively, to the world is dying, I don't care. That's an unacceptable, self-indulgent sort of sob story that I think a lot of people tell themselves about the environment, and it's updated, I think.
Paul, last question for you here, but what advice do you have for conservationists or conservation organizations right now who are trying to make more of an impact or reach the public with a message?
I think it starts with doing good work and being good people. I mean, I think that every time I've seen an organization where your gut is your best compass. And every time I've seen people, I go, I wonder why do I look at their stuff and I just feel a little funny? It's usually because there's something to feel funny about. But there's so many shining examples of people who are just down there doing their work every day. And again, whether that's in their backyards, I always tell people it doesn't have to be in Africa and the Amazon. There's wherever you live in your local neighborhood, there's some sort of ecosystem, even if it's in the city. And I see people planting indigenous flower species, trying to help migratory corridors. And when it comes to conservation organizations and initiatives that are working with specific species or trying to protect a specific ecosystem, I think that finding really fun and really emotional ways to connect with people is the ticket. You have to find a way to explain to people what the problem is, why you're trying to fix it, what's at stake. And you have to have the courage to share with them what it is that inspires you and draws you to that project. And if you can do that, people have an incredible barometer for authenticity and truth. And I think that anyone who stands up today and says, look, I'm trying to protect this local forest behind my house that they're going to make a building complex, whatever it is, there's no reason that shouldn't get attention. There's so many people connecting today that I think that this is a huge opportunity to protect a lot of the species that we're worried about and a lot of the ecosystems that we're worried about. And I think that there's a lot of encouraging things. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Manga Bay is that you get your urgent, triage news, as well as the success stories and sort of the general state of the union on conservation at all times. It never deviates. It never falters. It's always been the most reliable thing for me. So once again, this is so awesome to be able to talk to you guys about this.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, and I really appreciate that. It was it's pretty wild to meet you after almost 10 years later after reading your book. So thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Absolutely. I hope I see you in the jungle sometime.
If you want to check out Mother of God or read our review or learn more about Paul Rosolie and his work, you can do so by clicking the links in the show notes. As always, if you're enjoying the Manga Bay Newscast or any of our podcast content, such as our sister series, Manga Bay Explores, and you want to help us out, we really encourage you to spread the word about the work we're doing by telling a friend. Because word of mouth is actually the best way to help expand our reach. But as always, you can also support us by becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/MangaBay. Manga Bay is a nonprofit news outlet, so even just $1 per month does make a difference and does help us offset production costs. So if you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Frontline, go to patreon.com/MangaBay to learn more and support the Manga Bay Newscast and all of our podcast content. You and your friends can join the listeners who have downloaded the Manga Bay Newscast well over 500,000 times by subscribing to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, or you can download our app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either App Store for the Manga Bay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all of our previous episodes. And also, you can just read our news and inspiration from Nature's Frontline at mangabay.com, or you can follow us on social media. Find Manga Bay via our accounts on LinkedIn at Manga Bay News and on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Mastodon, Facebook, and TikTok, where our handle is at Manga Bay, or on YouTube at Manga Bay TV. Thanks, as always, for listening.